I mentioned at the start of the show, we have a guest joining us. He will be on the screen, I believe. We have Lieutenant General Stephen Kwast. And I will tell you that a quick bit about his background. He's a retired Air Force general, former commander of the Air Education and Training Command at Joint Base San Antonio Randolph. He's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy with a degree in astronautical engineering. And he holds a master's degree. Okay, well, forgive him the Harvard part, but he holds a master's degree in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He's a former fighter pilot with extensive combat and command experience. But the thing we're going to talk with him about has to do with the idea of the United States Space Force, something that you likely recall. President Trump directed the Department of Defense back in June of 2018 to begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the sixth branch of the armed forces. When I finished reading everything I've read to prepare for this interview, I was amazed how much I didn't realize and how vital this could be. So without further ado, I believe we have Lieutenant General Stephen Kwast online. Hello, sir.
Well, thank you very much. Hello, good to hear from you, and hope everybody in your family is safe and healthy with this coronavirus.
We are safe and healthy, and we are in one of those. I don't know how you are. I don't even know where you live, but right here, we're in shelter in place, so we're home all the time. Well, how are you doing with the virus?
Yeah, we're doing good, and everybody's home all the time, but still finding ways of trying to be effective through this wonderful medium we have.
That's a true story. Well, okay, I will tell you that I read, especially in reading the piece that came from Imprimis. I think you spoke at Hillsdale College, and for our listeners, I think everyone or most of our listeners should know Hillsdale College puts out a fabulous periodical called Imprimis, and you can just go online and read it. You can have it come to your home. You can print off all of the speeches, but you talk there about the idea of the U.S. Space Force, and I will tell you, sir, I had no idea why America was actually even thinking about it. So let me start with your experience in talking about this idea. You have come across or come to realize that there are, let me just start with, why do we need a Space Force? That's an easy start question. Why do we need a Space Force?
Right. So I'll use the example of your last story. As Abram was trying to get the word out about the facts and the truth about what's going on in the world, there was a concerted effort by others that didn't want that truth to be told to try to shut it down. This element of human nature and society and civilizations where information can change the game. If you don't know the truth, if you don't understand what's going on around you, you can't take actions to preserve your liberty or to do things that are meaningful for the prosperity of your people. And the reason why this matters with space is because the reason we need a space force is not just for its own sake. It's because China and other countries have decided to invest in an infrastructure that will allow them to dominate the communication network that resides in the electromagnetic spectrum all around us. Everything we hear and see, the entire internet, every cell phone, every radio is manipulated and worked through the electromagnetic spectrum. And China is planning on using space not only to design an economy to tap into trillions of dollars of market, the information domain on planet Earth. So when you hear people 5G and its danger, it's the fact that China is to employ a communication network globally in space to be able to manipulate any text, any email, any telephone call, and any form of communication so that nobody can talk bad about China, just like there are certain pockets like John Ball that you talked about that don't want people to hear about the truth about what's going on in certain pockets of extremist religions.
Wow, that was, first of all, that's a great thing you made an analogy to my my opening story. Okay, so I learned so much about it. I want to have people to follow through it with everything you're saying. To start with, China's more dedicated to this than we are right now. China is, but explain what they could, in practical terms, what could they do if China got way ahead of us and they dominated the Space Force before we were there? How specifically could they hurt us? What could they do with that?
Okay, I'll give you two examples, and they are ahead of us in the sense that they've already built a space force, and they have made it their national vision to dominate the economy of space. But I'll give you two examples. Everybody knows the example of how dependent we are on GPS right now, and GPS is a neural network space-based infrastructure that delivers this little signal that all your cell phones and your cars and your now even your refrigerators pick up. But we've made ourselves reliant on it. Even the delivery of water to your house is managed by systems that use a GPS signal to make the timing work. So if we lost GPS, we would lose our financial, our transportation, our water delivery, and many other capabilities that we rely on each day. So if China were to deploy an infrastructure in space and America was not there with them to compete along with them, they would have the ability to manipulate the information domain in every kind of system used to communicate with divided America. You could have your text manipulated by an artificial intelligence that can see your text, writing it, frame it, and deliver it wherever deliver it. It would be like having a car in your cell phone, but China owns the roads where you can start driving, but you can only go where they want you to go because that's where they've built the road. That's one example on the telecommunication piece of this, which is information. And that's the scary one, because if you control the narrative, you can control the perception of truth. And China, if they were further ahead on 5G than they are right now, this coronavirus, they might have been able to perpetuate their lie that the coronavirus was planted by the American military, and we as an American society would not be able to get the truth out. That's the consequence of the information domain of what they could do with space if they got there first and we were not there with them. The second is energy. From space, you can manipulate energy in a way that could disrupt or paralyze our entire electromagnetic system, or basically our energy grid, our power grid. So we rely on electricity for everything that powers the development and the prosperity of our economy, but that would be vulnerable because there would be somebody up there just a few miles above your head, anywhere you're at in America, that can manipulate the energy markets through a neural network of energy in space. So within the next 10 years, China is on track to have a nuclear and solar power generation plant in space that can beam energy to any point on planet Earth at pennies on the dollar for what we deliver with a large infrastructure terrestrially of plants and telephone wires and transformers delivered down to homes and businesses.
I'm shaking my head again. I had no idea literally until I'd had actually, I think you spoke at something where I had some friends attend, and they were saying afterwards, you have got to hear this guy. You've got to understand what he's saying. So the energy production, we go back to one thing you said, the energy production China could do in space. You're talking about actually producing nuclear energy in space. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. And
Okay.
it's not only
And
nuclear energy, but also solar power energy, taking the energy from the sun and converting it to energy that can be delivered to anybody.
And they could use whatever they have in space to transmit the energy created, the nuclear or solar, transmit that energy to Earth wherever they want it.
That's correct. And this is a technology we've known about for a long, long time. It's not new, but it was never affordable to put it up into space. But it is now, as we are developing new ways of getting to space cheaper. Look at Elon Musk, those re-entry rockets. He's basically built a model of going to space, and instead of having to burn up the rocket that you spent $1 billion building, instead of burning it up and having to build a new one for the next trip, he's built space access like an automobile, where you put gas in the car, you drive it to your location, and you use it again the next day. You don't have to burn your car up every time you drive it.
Yeah, it is amazing stuff. So back to China, it's really interesting because we're in the midst of this coronavirus crisis, and more Americans, I think to start with, when President Trump ran and he said we're going to change our trade arrangements with China, we're not going to continue to permit China to unfairly dominate, to have trade provisions that are simply unfair to the American people. We're going to challenge their theft of intellectual property, all the things he talked about. I think for the first time, Americans began recognizing, or at least a broader swath of Americans started recognizing, China isn't really our friend. Now with the coronavirus, even if even if the most innocent and organic source of the virus is what is a true story, China still lied to the world, lied to the World Health Organization, lied to America at the beginning of this. So I think that people are waking up to the idea, and we've had many people on the show talking about the 5G and what they're really doing with the Belt and Road Initiative. But people are starting to realize China is not just a really swell, interesting trade partner. They actually kind of are an enemy. I mean, they are an enemy of America, even though we feel like we have to work with them. We have to, we can't just ignore them. We have to work with them on the world stage. But the idea of dominance by China of a space force that we're not even close to able to compete with right now is very alarming. So, Tully, you spoke about and wrote about this idea that the military establishment has not so far been on track with developing this space force to compete essentially in the same way China is. Can you talk about why or what's going on at the U.S. military, the Air Force response to what President Trump asked them to do, looking and creating the space force?
Well, I think there's one issue in our society that we have been so strong as an American society and so dominant economically, politically, militarily, that we start believing that anything we do is going to be as successful as it always was. And this is part of what has befallen, I think, the military. And that is they still think in just purely military terms. But the real purpose of a military officer, the purpose I had when I put on the uniform, was to be a peacemaker, meaning that I was so clever, so strategic, so savvy that I was able to build such strength that nobody would ever in a million years ever fire a shot. So winning without firing a shot. But China's movement into space is not military. They don't want to have a fight. They want to dominate the economy. Yet the military's response is to just build more military capability to be able to defend against what China might do. And the military is not grasping the broader economic potential here, and that's where the disconnect is. So to put it simply, here's what's happening. I will use an analogy of the Navy and the area around the ocean. Right now, China is building the equivalent of a Navy in space. And the military currently has buoys and lighthouses out there, and they're going to continue building better buoys and lighthouses. But they won't be able to do anything against the massive firepower and dominant maneuver and dominant energy applications and communications that China is building well outside of the orbits. They're building all the way to the moon, and that's why you see their rover on the far side of the moon. We are not answering that call in the military. We are sticking to a very narrow Cold War idea of space, and China is outmaneuvering us into the broader space and to the moon.
Well, this is very, honestly, kind of surprising and very alarming. You know, one example you gave, and I thought was a really good one. I happen to have known this historical fact that during World War I, there was a reticence on the part of the American military to embrace the use of airplanes. That somehow our history with military up until that point was that we had infantry, we have troops on the ground, and so we were short-sighted was one word that was used about with General Pershing and Douglas MacArthur opposing the development of the airplane and the tank because they saw them as subservient to the infantry. And I know you're saying China does not want to have a war in space, but they want to be dominant. And we need to be responding. We're kind of reacting now, our military, is the way that Pershing and MacArthur did to the airplane in World War I. I thought that was a great analogy.
Well, the human nature that takes place in these kind of journeys does not change. And so just as if General Pershing and General MacArthur could have seen how many Americans had to be sacrificed because we did not develop a plane better than the Germans, and we did not develop a tank better than the Germans, they would have changed their position. But here we sit again at the edge of a new frontier in space that will have such power, it will pale in comparison to, it'll make the airplane and the tank pale in comparison. Yet we are not allowing space to be developed independent of the Air Force. It is still a subservient organization within the Air Force that has to go through the Air Force budget to be able to do its thing. And the Air Force thinks that the main event is serving the forces on the ground and to service the satellites in space. And the main event is competing economically with China. That's the major disconnect. We're falling into the same trap.
Well, we may have lost our connection there. I'm not sure. This is, folks, I am so excited about this guest, and I was very disappointed if we somehow lost the connection. Maybe Matt the Wonderful will try to do it again. We are doing the show, obviously, because we're in the coronavirus era where we have a shelter in place here in Dallas and doing my show from home. We had it all set up, and Matt, the wonderful producer, is helping from his home, and we have this interview going. I hope we can get it back. But while we're waiting to see if we can reconnect with General Kwast, I will tell you that this piece, I really urge, in fact, everything I ever talk about in my show, you can read the articles that I was referring to by going to our website, americacanwetalk.org, and on the home page, under shows, drop down list of links. You can read this very article. This is from Imprimis, which is from Hillsdale College, and Imprimis is the one, the entity that put this speech that General Kwast gave at Hillsdale into a readable format. And I learned so much about where we are in the country in terms of not having we aren't even developing the tools. We're not even responding to President Trump's request to work on the Space Force by creating the tools that will make us able to compete with China. We're, as he was just saying before we were cut off, we're kind of using the idea of a Space Force as the entity, the backup to help our ground troops do better. Oh, there we are. Okay, good. Do we have a connection?
I'm
not sure we have. Okay, so I'll just jump in and ask the next question. So what would you, General Kwast, if you were able to direct the entire military response to President Trump's request to develop a Space Force, what is needed for us to be able to actually compete with China?
Yeah, so can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, that was the Chinese interrupting our conversation because they don't want people to.
Might have been.
But what I will tell you is the president can do two things. One is give the Space Force the mission of defending commerce in space. This is equivalent of giving the Navy the mission of defending the open oceans commerce, which Teddy Roosevelt gave them when the Great White Fleet was built. And the second thing he needs to do is give them an area of responsibility that extends all the way to the moon. So that if we ever have an astronaut on the moon in 2024, and then China tries to start messing with us, that the American people know that their astronauts will be defended and recovered and rescued if required by the Space Force.
I love that. You have this article I was mentioning while we had our unfortunate intermission there. I was mentioning that what you said when you spoke at Hillsdale and is included in this Imprimis article, it spells out a variety. I mean, it spells out the problem in very clear, easy to understand language about the difference between how China is approaching what they're doing in their Space Force work and how America so far has been responding. And you also had a long variety of steps that we could take if we get serious about this. So what is your sense? Is the military beginning to respond better to what President Trump is trying to have them do, or are you on a mission to try to get them to respond in a broader way?
This gets back to leadership, and there are plenty of people that believe that this is true, that we must do this, but they're also trapped. They're trapped by a process. And so right now, the fact that the Space Force has to beg, borrow, and steal for every dollar they spend through the Air Force budget will make it compete against the airplanes and the other things the Air Force has to build. That is an unfair dilemma. And it's the old example. If you give people an impossible problem, even great people are going to falter. That's why this president needs to help them by giving them the mission. Otherwise, they'll just continue to suboptimize a better satellite fleet that won't be able to actually solve the problem of competing with China in the economy of space.
This is great answers. And actually, I do, beyond the piece I've mentioned several times in Primus, where can people go learn more about what you're doing and what you're trying to advance? Is there some other place you can send them on the internet, or?
Absolutely. Well, this internet is such a beautiful thing because you can just find information all over the place. So all you have to do is Google fast space or the Space Force and or any industrialization of space. And the opportunity for America here is as follows. One, our young generation sees this. They see that space will be able to provide things for humanity that can get rid of pollution, that can help connect us with information that we don't have to mistrust. Right now, the internet can't be trusted. Your information can be used as a weapon against you. So we can provide clean air, abundant energy, trusted information. In a connected world where the coronavirus shows our interconnection, these are things we could build as a community, but it needs to start with leadership. And America and our economy is the one that can help usher in a new era. It would be like building the Panama Canal to increase the prosperity of the entire Western Hemisphere. If America can build an infrastructure in space predicated on the economy, and they have a space force that can defend that economy, we will usher in a new era of economic power and economic might and prosperity and lift people out of poverty.
I love that. That was one of the many points, but you can't go into all of what you spoke about the Space Force. But the idea of producing energy in space, I mean, that alone, all of the convoluted arguments we have in this country about whether we should do fracking and whether fossil fuels are good or bad, all of that notion of producing energy in space, there's so many very positive things, which I'm amazed that there isn't more energy behind this idea to prioritize, I guess is the word, prioritize it for America.
Yeah, it's hard, and you have to forgive people because when we went from wooden ships and sails to iron ships and coal and oil, the sail-making industry and the wood shipbuilding industry fought President Roosevelt tooth and nail. So we are built up around an entire economic giant that is doing things the way we do them today. It's very hard to break out of this. When Tesla and Edison offered electricity into the homes, the candle makers of the world rebelled. I mean, it was a big deal. We don't remember that because we weren't alive when that took place, but the same thing is happening as people cling to the present and the status quo. And something that disruptive, that big, is hard to do, even if it could solve the pollution problem. Because right now, the opportunity is, for the first time in human history, human beings have the engineering know-how to reach to the heavens for all of our needs as a way of augmenting things on Earth so we can get rid of pollution. And we can provide energy to people even if they don't live near a city, provide water to them even if they don't live next to a lake or near an aquifer or the ocean to desalinate. These are the kinds of problems we can solve that are kind to the earth and prosperous for our people. But you need leaders that are willing to tell the story and take the risk to build new.
Lieutenant General Kwast, that is first of all, you're very passionate, which I love. I urge everyone listening to read the article from Primus. That is his speech. It's the speech he gave at Hillsdale College. And to understand more about this, honestly, I feel like once I finished reading it, I was thinking, I can't believe I didn't know about this whole opportunity for America. And, we get caught up in the immediacy of our problems in our country. Right now we're all focused on coronavirus, and last year focused on caravans at the borders. But this is forward thinking, and this is preemptive as to keeping our American country with, I don't want to say we're in battling with China, but we're keeping ourselves even with China. We're not letting them get ahead and preventing them from putting us in a dangerous situation where we are then reliant on them because they've got the dominance in the space world.
Right. And regardless of China, even if China were not in this equation, but they are, so that's why we have to move fast. Even if they weren't, we have to recognize this coronavirus is teaching us something. And it's teaching us that we are too vulnerable as a society. We don't have the resilience. And space can allow us to have resilient energy because we can bring energy from multiple places, not just from an electrical wire, but from radio waves that are safe for human beings from space. We can have resilient food supply chains, and we don't have to rely on outsourcing it. We can have resilient manufacturing because we have abundant energy in America and a workforce that wants to work, so we don't have to outsource pharmaceuticals to China. So this wake-up call by the coronavirus actually applies to a space force where we start with the guardians that protect our economy so that American entrepreneurs can build infrastructure in space to deliver resilience to the American communities. So we have food and water we can rely on, shelter that's affordable, energy that's abundant and reliable, and information that can be trusted.
Lieutenant General Kwast, that is just an amazing interview. Thank you so much for taking time and joining me today. I loved it. I learned so much. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you, and God bless you, and stay safe.
Thank you, sir. You stay safe also. And that, my friends, I can't urge you strongly enough to read what I was just referring to from Imprimis. Again, it's on our website, americancamwetalk.org. You can read all those stories we're talking, all the articles I use in preparing today's show. I want to hit two last quick topics. One is, as we get through this coronavirus, and again, I want to be hopeful, we will get through this. America will survive. We will bring back our free market economy. We need millions of Americans standing up and saying, we want our country back. We're going to fight. We're going to fight to bring our economy back. We're going to be participating in all the steps we have to take to keep us safe from the coronavirus, including all the, hand washing, et cetera, things we're doing. But we're going to have our country back. We're in a bit of a panic mode right now, and we have to believe in our country enough, know we can get it back.